Hello! So you have just received a copy of this great book, and we're gonna go through it and review it.
I'm going to tell you what I thought. I just finished reading this book this weekend. It's called Gamemaster Classified. It's by Howard Phillips, and it is a really insightful look into a decade-long stretch at Nintendo. Howard Phillips worked at Nintendo from 1981 to 1991.
Yeah.
And really saw this huge transformation of the company. When he started, he was working in a warehouse, kind of packing and shipping up arcade machines.
Yeah.
And by the time he left, Nintendo was getting ready to release the Super Nintendo, and he was dubbed the Game Master and was sort of the front of the company.
Yeah. It's a crazy trajectory for his career, and he really saw some of the stuff that is like how Nintendo became what we know today, Nintendo of America. And it must have been such an interesting time for him to have experienced that, because that's something that we heard stories about from some of the people at Nintendo with long tenures that are actually in this book as well. And to see it kind of come to life in this book, there's like a lot of illustrations and photos and things like that, is really, really cool.
Yeah, so if you didn't know, if you're new to our channel, we both also worked at Nintendo for over 10 years and we left in 2022. So it was interesting to get this glimpse into this era where there's not a lot of people who are still with the company. There's a handful of people who we worked with, and again, who you said are sort of mentioned in the book from time to time. But this is a really exhaustive accounting of that time. I don't know what kind of notes he kept, because he goes into a level of detail on some things that, like, I certainly don't have.
Yeah,
those
I wonder,
notes.
I'm sure working on, and Howard is instrumental in working on Nintendo Power. So I wonder if working on Nintendo Power sort of forced that level of note-taking. There is some like weird similarities between our experience working at Nintendo and sort of Howard's experience as he details in this book. But like sometimes I feel the same way. It's like, I feel like 10 years of our life is captured in Nintendo Minute Video. So I wonder if he felt like 10 years of his life is captured in Nintendo Power Minute.
Yeah, it's amazing to see from our perspective things that were different about the company back then, but there's a lot of things that are
really
still
similar.
Very similar. And sort of the trajectory of his time at Nintendo is very similar to ours.
Yeah.
But for starters, let's talk about like the way this book is structured. This is not a novel. This is not just, pages of text.
Yeah.
Like this has a really fun layout that is meant to imitate the style of Nintendo Power.
Yeah.
And again, Howard was really the front of Nintendo Power. There was the Howard and Nestor comic. You always saw his picture in the magazine. He was like the James Bond of like the 10-year-olds of that era, of which I was one.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
It's like, what?
Howard living his like glamorous life.
Yeah, Howard's at the Nintendo World Championships. Wow, Howard's hanging out with new kids on the block. I want to be like Howard.
Yeah, bow tie. Like,
right.
He was really the face of that era of Nintendo, which is
totally
interesting. Yeah.
So the book goes year by year. It's broke every year is a chapter. And it starts out, I think, very helpfully talking about what was just happening in games at that time.
Even pop culture.
At Nintendo very broadly. He has like the financials for Nintendo for every year of like, hey, the company was making money or the company wasn't doing so great this year.
Yeah, it's
which
good
is
to have that context,
helpful
right?
context. And then he gets into some bigger picture stories that he wants to tell. Every chapter has one that is told in like a Howard and Nestor style comic.
I think that's so much fun that he kept that as a way of storytelling, because that's what we were used to seeing. Howard and The
co-author of this book, Matthew Taranto, he did all of the comics that are in here. Does a great job of imitating that style. Brings a lot of personality to the book.
Yeah.
He also goes through, again, this is very exhaustive, like all of the games that he played or experienced that year.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are like not just Nintendo games. Early on when it was like the arcade days, it was like, oh, I played Pac-Man, here's what I thought of Pac-Man.
Right.
But later on, he became the person who evaluated every game that came through Nintendo. And this is a system that still exists at Nintendo.
Yes,
There's still people at Nintendo who do these
not just
evaluations.
Howard. Now there's a whole team of evaluations that happen, and that evaluation is still really important at Nintendo, and it makes it into like tons of sort of market research and plans for how we are marketing a game. It's so interesting that it was started by Howard.
Right, and it started because they needed somebody who knew games to be able to choose, like, gosh, of all these games we might bring over from Japan, like, which one should we prioritize?
Yeah.
So he actually had a super important role of, like, the games that became big or that we associate with the NES.
Right.
Because he handpicked those.
Right.
He started with one job and kind of over time got drawn into all of these different roles.
Right.
And I think I got the feeling by the end, he was like, what was my actual job to begin with? Because I'm wearing so many different hats, I'm doing so many different things. So he was evaluating all these games.
Yep.
That was really his, like, quote, real job. He was also one of the main editors of Nintendo Power.
Right.
Interesting detail I didn't know. Every month, they had to fly to Japan. I guess the production for the magazine was done in Japan.
Yeah, so they would do it every month, fly to Japan
Every
to do
month,
it.
right.
That's very challenging.
Him and Gail Tilden, who was the other
I love Gail.
editor
She's the best.
of the magazine,
Yeah.
had to go to Japan to get everything laid out and finalized.
And approved, I'm
Right.
sure. Yeah.
Again, also as being the face of Nintendo, he would have to go, like, on every press tour and be the spokesperson for Nintendo.
That can get old.
So, and then he was talking about, in a year I might be evaluating 500 games. And that's a lot to do.
That's a lot to do.
It's not a Nintendo Switch. You can't hammer through these games on your flight to Japan.
No, you gotta, like, plug into something.
So the sense of fatigue and weariness and getting burnt out over time
Is really real.
is something that I think we related to because like Nintendo Minute was never our job.
Yeah.
Like, it was never in our job description, but it was something that we did out of love, and it was something that was good for the company. But it was something that
took time and energy.
Took time, and we had to do sort of out of the spare time that we had. Also, by playing all these games, he had this really good insight into, like, what the development team's strengths and weaknesses were.
Yeah.
And he was pointing out, going into from NES to Super Nintendo, like, Nintendo had not done a good job of training people beyond Mr. Miyamoto to be a leader of a team and to be able to shepherd these big creative games and projects. So I think people just assume, like, oh yeah, Nintendo had it all down. It was all perfect. It was all, daisies and rainbows. Not the case. He sort of lays that out in a really effective way. I also definitely resonated with his story about why he left Nintendo, which was, so later on he got this moniker, the Gamemaster.
Yeah.
And that was, again, what he was using when he was in a public-facing role. Eventually, his bosses wanted to change that to the Fun Master.
Barf.
And they came up with what he describes as, some really kind of tacky characteristics that the Fun Master would have. They wanted him to go on a nationwide Fun Master tour where they had all these, as he described them, really, bad talking points that were just,
they were like PR speak and
just like sales
not
talk.
authentic to him.
Right.
Yeah.
So he was like, it was frustrating that I was the expert of being the game master and it was going well, but people kept wanting to change that. And the people who were giving me this feedback were not experts in this at all. They were just the boss when they couldn't have just left me alone to do my job that I was doing very well.
Exactly.
And that spoke to us.
That definitely spoke to us. And it can be really tiring to fight that battle, like, day after day. And yeah, he left, and then we did too. So
yeah. But overall, I really enjoyed this book. I would strongly recommend it. A very personal, very lighthearted look at what it was like in this super important era of Nintendo.
Yeah.
And again, just a lot of information that I haven't found in a lot of places put together all at once. So I'm sort of surprised that more people aren't talking about this.
Yeah. There's so much information on every single page. Like, I feel like you could just spend, a lot of time pouring through this book because there's so many little details that, I've never heard before. So yes, if you have not picked this book up yet, please do. We will leave the link on how to do that in the description. It's a little bit tough to find this book. It's not on, like,
it's not yet
traditional bookseller.
It's not on
places.
Amazon. It's not on a lot of traditional booksellers, but it's out there. You can get it online.
We'll put the link below.
Yeah.
Howard, come on the podcast.
Please.
Please. Thanks. All right, we're going to wrap it up for today, and we'll see you guys later.
Bye.
Bye.